I'm here for the first time.
Cool. Sure. Thanks, Ghoster. Cool. That's great, Crumb. Crumb's here for the first time. Mark, I believe you also raised your hand. Nice to meet you. Um, Thanks for coming out. Uh, and welcome. So, for those who are new, this is just a group of gamers who get together in Altspace and kind of talk about their hobby and a place to arrange games and play games in Altspace and outside of Altspace. Uh, yeah, sorry about that, Crumb. All right, so first off, just kind of going through this week's agenda. So as per usual, I've got a few announcements just to kind of inform everybody on kind of like recent developments and things that we're planning and things that we're doing. I've got an announcement that's kind of exciting and a little disappointing at the same time. So I'll get that out of the way first. And then we're going to go through our weekly discussion where we talk about games and the types of games we like and kind of what our interests are. And this week I thought because it was Halloween that we would focus on spooky games and horror themed games because that's just really kind of the flavor of the season, I guess you would say. And specifically, I want to talk about a subset of spooky games or horror themed games. A lot of those games are of the social deduction type flavor, and I just wanted to kind of cover that and add that in because it's a topic that I'm particularly interested in, and I know that there's a lot of gamers in Altspace who are into that kind of thing. And then just getting down to the disappointing thing, this week I was hoping that we would have the opportunity to be kind of the first ones to officially play a new game that's coming out to Altspace, which is a social deduction game. But unfortunately, it's just not quite to the point where it's ready for public consumption yet. So instead, what I was planning on doing is I knew there was actually several people who were disappointed that they couldn't get into Love Letter last week. So we were, or pardon me, 2 weeks ago when we did that for the European meetup. So what I was going to do is I was going to organize another session where I could teach the rules and kind of get people going in that game, since we have an opportunity to do that because the other game isn't quite ready yet. So anyway, just kind of a quick opener here. Happy Halloween to everybody. I don't know where everybody's coming from, but I think Halloween is kind of spread all over the world at this point. But obviously a big deal here in the United States. In fact, if you hear me run away, it's because somebody came to my door and rang the bell and they want candy, even though I turned off my light. I feel bad about doing that because I live in the Eastern United States, and right now is like peak Halloween time. So like people probably will be coming here looking for candy. But guess what? I've got 10 pounds of Halloween candy, and I'm thinking since this event is right now, I get to eat all of that myself. What do you guys think? But
Nice.
but maybe what that means though is my house is getting toilet papered right now, for all I know. Like, or my windows are getting soaped or who knows what else might be happening.
Free toilet paper.
Hey Dara, could I ask you to please step away from the screen? Thank you very much. Oh, no worries. I appreciate you doing that for me. Thank you. Um, so this is being streamed to the Hive. So just watch yourself. We're gonna have a discussion. Think about the fact that your language is gonna be broadcast to YouTube. So plan accordingly. And I also just want to thank Ghoster, who does the streaming for us. He does a great job. And also our mod, Rockabella, he's here. And I actually, really appreciate that because, I'm sure I'm gonna face a harsh heckling as this goes along. But no, I'm just joking. I'm sure it won't be too bad. But so anyway, what I intend for this group is, I just wanted it to be a place for alt spacers to kind of gather around as gamers and talk about what they're interested in, and also a way for us to gather and maybe play more complex games that's kind of difficult for us to do without a little bit of structure. And I don't want to limit this to anything in particular, right? We've got some pretty cool games here. People like playing Holograms Against Humanity. People like playing Love Letter and Boss Monster and all the cool stuff that we've got. But just an opportunity to maybe go out to Tabletop Simulator and kind of check that action out, or get together for some tabletop RPGs. It's all in play. So, let's talk. Let's talk about how we can organize that kind of thing. All right. So anyway, for the last, I don't know, 5 or 6 weeks that I've been doing this, there's been this little picture down here in the corner of me and oh, there's Leah, who's here tonight, and a bunch of other people in Altspace playing this game, right? And I was hoping we were going to play this game here tonight, but we're not quite to the point where we can. But I just wanted to make the announcement though again that like I did last week. Secret Caesar, it's kind of like a semi-public thing now that there's going to be a new game in Altspace. It's awesome. It's a social deduction game. I've played it many times with actually many of you that I see out there right now. And Steven will actually be here some week not too far in the future, I'm hoping, to do the public release of this. And it's just a matter of when, we can actually kind of do that. But I had a chance to play the game again this weekend, and it's playing really well. And it's really awesome, and I can't wait until people in Altspace globally have the chance to play it. I'm going to talk a little bit more about Secret Caesar as the night goes on here, but just know that, it's awesome. It's the perfect game for Altspace, and it's coming soon. So just to review kind of where we're at. So just some recent kind of events. So I've kind of been going through what I've been calling the pillars of tabletop, and we're taking a break from that this week. So what I mean by the pillars of tabletop are all the major types of games that exist that kind of make up tabletop gaming and the hobby in general. This week we're going to pause that for a bit, and we're going to talk about spooky games for Halloween and social deduction. Which is a pretty large and important subset, I would say, of the horror genre. Not all social deduction games are horror games, including Secret Caesar. Clearly not a horror game, but there's a pretty good overlap on the Venn diagram, I'd say. After that, we're going to kind of continue with some of the additional major areas of gaming. November 14th, I said I was going to take the week off. Guess what? I'm not. We're actually going to do a special event that week. Hear more about that later, but we're going to be having a little bit of a more larger scale event for games and puzzles, National Games and Puzzles Week here in the United States. We're going to be celebrating that here in Altspace. So let me fill you out on that. I think it's actually going to be maybe around maybe it even will be November 21st. I'm not sure. And then finally, if I take my finger away there so it disappears. On November 28th, we're going to have Chris O'Neill here, who is a designer of a game called Boss Monster, which we have right here in Altspace. And some of you may know Chris because he semi-regularly comes into Altspace to show off his game. But we're going to have a special sit-down with Chris because I think one of the really cool things about modern board games and modern tabletop is Kickstarter and crowdfunding of indie games. I think it's an exciting way that a lot of really cool games that wouldn't have gotten made previously are now getting made. And Chris, as an indie game designer and the co-owner of a small but still really influential game company. Here in the United States, you can go to Target, which is kind of like our one of our main department stores, and you can buy his game now, right? And it started as a Kickstarter. And that's really kind of amazing. So I'm really excited to have the opportunity to kind of talk to him about that. So a few informational announcements. So screenshot this, join this if you haven't already. It's the BGG Guild, which is one of the main places where we kind of get together and talk offline and organize games, organize sessions on Tabletop Simulator. I want to try to get as many people in here as I can, but I've heard feedback that maybe Board Game Geek isn't the best solution for everything. And some folks have said that maybe we should have something that's a little bit more interactive for when we actually do get together for gaming sessions. So I took that suggestion to heart. And I've also started a Discord. And I think probably a lot of you are familiar with Discord. So it's a platform where, in addition to kind of conventional text chat, you can also do voice chat while you play games together. And it's really convenient because if you're on Oculus or Vive, it's really easy to just go in there and join kind of like an active voice chat room. So, screenshot this as well and consider, logging into these meeting places so that you can join the conversation about these gaming activities. All right, so Tabletop Simulator, just more informational. So there's been some folks who have been expressing interest in maybe getting together to do Gaming and Tabletop Simulator, which is a resource that has some functionality that we don't necessarily have here in AltSpace. But at the same time, it is kind of outside of these four walls, or I don't know, these polygons. I don't know how to express it. So it would require us to do a little bit of coordination. So, I just wanted to kind of bring that up and mention that we're still looking to maybe organize that. Last week we attempted the first event in Tabletop Simulator, but I think that maybe it was kind of difficult to organize without something like Discord. So once we get into those platforms, maybe we'll try that again. All right, so let's go to the first discussion topic for this week, which is spooky games. Being Halloween, I thought that this would be a good place to start. Oh, okay, it looks like maybe we have a question before I go into that. Ian, are you? No? Okay. So
spooky.
I can't hear you if you're trying to talk, Ian.
Oh, I'm sorry about that. I had to unmute. Are these games rated PG, PG-13? Is there?
So in respect to AltSpace gaming or Tabletop Simulator?
Simulator.
So Tabletop Simulator is pretty much, I would say 90% of the time going to be PG or lower. There may be some exceptions to that with some of the more thematic games, but Tabletop Simulator is a sandbox platform for the implementation of board games, card games, and role-playing games. So it really takes on the nature of whatever the basis is for that game implementation. Yeah.
Well, it is online, so your experience may vary, right? PG-13 at least, I'd give it.
Yes, Stephen raises a good point. You never know who you're going to meet there. But if you're in a private room, you can control access, of course. But it's.
Can you move back, please? Back from the camera.
Yeah.
This way. Thank you.
All right, thanks, Ian. All right, so first discussion topic: spooky games. I think that horror themes or spooky themes have been kind of a major mainstay of tabletop gaming, almost from the beginning of thematic gaming, and it's not particularly a personal favorite of mine, but I do think around this time of year I like to think about this type of game, and I just kind of picked out a few examples that I thought are very representative. And we can talk later about things that other folks here like. But I think there's a very good reason that horror themes are well liked, because it really kind of gets to the developing of a really kind of active and engaging world for gaming. We can't play games about like farming and boring stuff all the time, and horror is obviously something that might get people a little bit more excited. So you might find games that do anything from like representing kind of like your classic horror films like Dracula and Frankenstein's monster and werewolves and all that kind of cool stuff, to games like Zombicide, which are based on kind of, let's be honest, it's a bit of a Walking Dead type ripoff. So you've got the wide range of horror themes represented. So co-op games and social deduction type games, I think especially, tend to use horror theme, but I think the reason they do is that both of those game types tend to be heavily atmospheric, and the integration with the theme is really important. When you're playing a Euro game, it's kind of okay to be like fighting over having like the best cow farm. People are kind of willing to accept that, but when you're cooperating with people and trying to fight against like a common foe, I think something that's a little bit more interesting and spicy thematically, like fighting Dracula, is going to be something that people are going to gravitate to a little bit more. And I think social deduction, it comes out of the relationship with some of the parent games like Werewolf, that kind of inherited it and the kind of convenient integration with the trader mechanic that's really common to those types of games. And I think probably the genre that has exploited horror themes probably the most are tabletop RPGs. So I just picked out one here, which is Call of Cthulhu, which is probably the most continuously successful of the horror-themed RPGs. But it's just one example. I mean, D&D has a whole module called the Ravenloft modules at this point. It's basically a universe for D&D. It's completely based on horror-type themes. So horror runs throughout tabletop RPGs. So definitely one of the most important and most active themes in tabletop gaming. So if I had to sit down and pick my favorite, it's not something that I'm especially interested in, but I do love me some good sci-fi horror. Alien is one of my favorite films. Does anybody here like the film Alien? That's one of my absolute with Sigourney Weaver and the chest bursters and all that awesome stuff, right? That's a great film. So what Dark Moon does is it takes Alien and turns it into a really awesome trader board game. So the whole idea is you're working with 6 other people in a space station, and that space station has become infected with this alien disease. And the alien disease turns people into these horrible creatures that just destroy and sabotage all the systems on that space station. So you're sitting there going along trying to do all your cool space station research, but you've got these people who are corrupted, who are trying to turn off the oxygen or blow up holes in the atmospheric containment system. And the way it does it is by, you have these screens in front of you, and every turn you roll dice, and what dice you submit depends upon whether you're one of the infected or one of the good guys. And the whole game, the infected are trying to do everything they can to submit the crappy dice to the missions without the good guys figuring out who's trying to deceive and kind of sell out the great party. So it's just an amazing theme. I mean, it feels like you're in Alien or a similar film. There's real tension. You're looking around the table. You're trying to figure out, who is, who are the infected? Who's trying to actually help on these missions? The way they have it set up, it's sometimes hard to tell. There's a mechanic in there where it's unclear whether someone is submitting a bad die or if they just rolled really poorly. It's a really great mechanic. Yeah. Is that global, guys?
I was just about to send a message. There's a few other
Yeah, it's cutting out pretty bad.
Yeah.
There he is.
Can you guys hear me better now?
Perfect.
Excellent. Thanks for telling me, guys. I appreciate it. That'll let me sit here and make robot noises for the next 10 minutes. Even though I am a robot, I suppose, but I don't want to be that thematic. And then the last thing, you'll hate your friends playing this game. And I feel like that's the great mark of any trader mechanic game. If you don't end up absolutely hating all the other people you're playing the game with at the end of a trader game, that game is not designed well enough, because that's really the sensation that you should have. The only downside to this game is I really only want to play it with 7 people, and that's kind of a weird thing, right? How many times do you get together with your friends and you're like, there's exactly 7 of us, should we play Dark Moon? But I feel like that's kind of how this game is set up. And I also think that if you're very experienced with the game, you're going to just dominate, especially if you're infected. Steven, did you have something you wanted to add to the conversation?
Yeah, I was just gonna throw out. It's funny you mentioned the only play if you have 7 people. So one of my favorite board games is XCOM, the board game. And the premise of this, it's a cooperative game where you have 4 players and you're trying to defeat the alien invasion that is driven by a smartphone app. So the opposing forces are all driven by the app, and it reacts to your. Yeah, it's interesting, but it's basically if you play with fewer than 4 players, you have to double up roles. So each person is responsible for one thing with 4, But if you have fewer, then like each person has 2 or things like that. It makes it a little harder to keep track of.
Yeah, I've never played XCOM, but I've heard that from several people that you really want to play that with a full complement. Is it 4 people, Steven?
It's
For a team? Yeah. And you need to have all those rules filled out, or it's just a lot to keep up with. That's awesome, but that's got a similar theme, right? That's like you're fighting off an alien force or something. Yeah.
Yeah, it's the same theme. It's if anyone played XCOM, the video game, it's basically that game without the actual missions, right? So all the base management and everything is all sort of distilled into the board game. It's great.
Awesome. Yeah, so I really want to play that game because it's actually designed by one of my absolute favorite designers, Eric Lang, I believe was the designer of that game. And he is just amazing. So I need to try that. But it's always tough to get co-ops played, I think. At least amongst my friends. Maybe they're too competitive. Cool. So anyway, this is similar to... Has anybody ever played Battlestar Galactica, the board game? Yeah, okay, cool. So both Steve and Ian have played it. Dark Moon used to actually be called Battlestar Galactica Express. It's a dice game that's based on Battlestar Galactica, the board game. But actually, it's funny. It was totally like unsanctioned. And what ended up happening, it was such a good unsanctioned game. A real game company, Stronghold Games, bought the mechanics and reskinned it to be Dark Moon. That's how good of a game it is. Like basically, this was like a fan-made dice game based on Battlestar Galactica, the game. So instead of being Cylons, like you would be in BSG Express, you're what's called the Infected in here. So it's really good. I can't recommend it enough, especially if you ever find yourself with 7 people. So Stephen already has kind of gotten in on the conversation, and I think Ian wants to contribute. But first off, so Ian, I'll let you talk before I ask the question. But yeah, sir.
It is one of my most favorite games ever, so I'm interested in the Moon.
I'm sorry, Ian. What game? What game is your favorite?
Galactica. It's a great game.
Oh, BSG. Oh yeah.
Man. Oh
well,
man.
So and I mean, Dark Moon gives a similar experience, but like in an hour and a half instead of. I mean, what's the longest game of BSG you've ever played?
Took forever. Felt like forever, but yeah.
I've played that game for 6 hours already. When we played it with all the expansions, it took 6 hours. Hey, what's up, Andy? So we're in the middle of an event. So.
Who's that?
Okay. Oh, sure.
Okay. Continue.
Oh, it looks like Owen has a question.
He does not.
No, okay.
Looks like Shiseki wants to get in. Go for it, Shiseki.
Oh, I was going to say, because obviously looking up horror and spooky games and stuff, when I was a child of the 80s and we used to have this game called Horror House. I would just wonder if anybody ever played that. And even though I don't really remember the game so much, what I did like was that the fact that all of the monsters which were in it is sort of like a basic, sort of, not quite snakes and ladders, but sort of get around the board, and there was like a random thing in the middle you'd poke and it would make some electronic laughter or whatever. But all the monsters in it were from folk tales from around the world. So you were actually learning about horror monsters and things from all different parts of the world based on the different cards which were in the game. Anyway, I just thought I brought it up.
That's cool. I'm not familiar with that one, but I'm wondering maybe if that didn't make it across the Atlantic. It seems like the games were quite, there was a little bit more difference between the European and
Sure.
North American game markets in those days. But I definitely have a lot of memories, though, of playing kind of like those haunted house or running away from some sort of creature, kind of like Hasbro style games in the 80s. So, Rockabella.
I just remembered a board game I used to play when I was younger, and it was a VHS style board game, and it was called Atmosphere.
Oh,
Did
Yes, I
cool.
remember
play
that.
game?
Yes,
Oh,
I played
I
that.
was I had all the games. Like I had bought just a few years ago. I managed to source them on eBay, and I think I've got like 4 of them in my garage. And I just remembered it there. That was like my all-time favorite VHS
Oh,
I
type
remember
board
that. I
game.
really remember that
Oh,
atmosphere. Yeah.
yeah, that was my favorite.
I totally forgot about those VHS games. Those things were awesome. I really wanted the Star Trek one really bad when I was a kid. The one with like the Klingon invasion or whatever that was. Like I don't even know what that was called, but yeah, my parents would never buy me that one. But
They've actually got
Can I say
DVD
something?
ones now. Oh, sorry, go on.
sure,
No,
Andy,
no,
what's up?
sorry. Oh, anybody here played the Star Trek VR game? Like, and what you all think of it? Like,
Oh,
yeah.
Bridge Crew? I've played that for
Yeah,
several
I
dozen
played it.
hours, Andy. That's an amazing game.
Best
And
game.
actually, yeah. All right. So anybody else have anything to say about like spooky or horror themed games? Steven, looks like you have some more comments.
Yeah, I'm just surprised that nobody mentioned Arkham Horror yet.
Oh my goodness. Yeah, I'm surprised too. I intentionally left it off my previous slide because I thought someone would bring it up. Do you have any memories of playing Arkham Horror, or have you
Well,
actually
so-
ever finished a game?
Well, actually, so it was funny. In my D&D group, the thing that we would always play if we didn't have enough, like if too many people were missing, was we would bring up Arkham Horror. Well, inevitably, I was always the one missing, so I never actually got to play this game until very recently. But yeah, that is a lot of fun. Takes forever though, man. It's like 8 hours.
It is. And there's a new version of Arkham Horror, or I should say maybe a new game in the same system called Eldritch Horror. Have you played or heard of that one, Steven? Or
Not familiar with that one.
okay, yeah. So Fantasy Flight, I think it's probably almost 5 years ago now, released Eldritch Horror, which is based on the same basic game system of Arkham Horror, but it has a streamlined rule set. You can crank out a game of Eldritch Horror in about 3 hours, pretty reliably. But it's got kind of the same thing going on. But yeah, it's Cthulhu as well, and all the elder gods wreaking havoc. Just
Who
in
owns
1/3 the
rights to
time.
Lovecraft mythos, anyway. Are they public domain? I guess.
They are.
He seems to make games for those.
That is the reason Lovecraft is so popular in tabletop gaming, is because there's no strings attached, or very few. Yeah. So there you go, Steven. You could have made Secret Cthulhu.
Hard to keep that one a secret. I'm imagining like an Octodad scenario where, hello fellow humans.
Anybody else have any thoughts about spooky games or horror games, kind of in the spirit of Halloween here?
Does anybody ever play Bloodborne?
Oh, Bloodborne. You mean the new game that just came out from Cool Mini or Not?
Yeah.
The
I
card
think it
game?
No, this is a console game.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. Very spooky.
So the reason I'm excited is because there's a Bloodborne card game that just came out this year, also designed by Eric Lang, the same guy who designed XCOM, the board game. So I was curious if you had played it. But cool. So you like the Bloodborne theme then? Yeah.
And Dark Souls, yeah. I tell you what, it's some amazing artwork for spooky artwork, horror artwork, and those Magic the Gathering cards. Because obviously one of the colors is black, which obviously is related to death and destruction, and the artwork is just out of this world. It's like the Phyrexian horrors and all that sort of stuff. It's just terrifying, but also amazing. Anyway, because it's Magic the Gathering, I guess, would count under spooky games.
Absolutely. Magic the Gathering, the game that makes the tabletop industry go forward. Even if you don't play it, you have to admire it and appreciate what it does for the whole industry.
Yeah.
Hey, Charles, it's nice to meet you, but I'm in the middle of an event. If you don't mind giving a little bit of space. But
Move your ass.
all right. Thanks, Rockabella. So if there's nothing else, I think we'll go to our next topic for the evening. So when I thought of Halloween, I was like, oh crap, I don't like horror games that much. But then I realized I do like quite a few horror games that are social deduction games. It's one of my absolute favorite genres of gaming. And even if you don't know what a social deduction game is, there's a good chance you've already played one. How many people here have played Werewolf or Mafia or any derivative thereof? Yeah, I'm seeing quite a few people, it looks like, have played it. So Werewolf and Mafia are quite old games. I believe Mafia, actually, I think the origin of Mafia is not completely understood. So I really can't speak to that. But Werewolf definitely is from the early 80s. It came a little bit later. The idea is you have some number of players that are werewolves that are trying to continue to survive and progressively kind of kill off the other characters so that they can survive to the end of the game as the werewolves. And the other players are trying to establish who the werewolves are so that they can be kind of taken outside of the village and done away with so that the village can be safe. It's a really simple idea that has been dramatically refined over the years by adding additional roles and additional complexity to the game. And it's created this idea of secret identity and trying to work out the secret identity of the players in a game. And there's usually two factions. The more sophisticated modern games have introduced way more than that. But we'll just say that, you know, you've got the good guys and you've got the bad guys. And often the bad guys are traitors. And what I mean by being traitors, they're actively trying to sabotage the game in some fashion. So they're trying to perhaps prevent the common objective from being satisfied, or they're trying to somehow do negative things to the other players. And the way that you kind of figure out who is by looking at how the other players are playing, or look at, you know, just little social cues. You know, if someone maybe, you know, talking a little too much, or are they talking less than they normally do? Is their hand shaking? Are they looking down, not making eye contact with you? So you're trying to use those little social cues to figure out, is someone telling me the truth? Is someone the traitor? Is someone the werewolf? And Werewolf was a cool game. We all had a lot of fun playing it, but there were a couple bummers about it. Number one, it took a really long time for a pretty simple game. Werewolf can take way longer than it feels like it should, given the complexity of the game sometimes. And some people really don't like that. I'm okay with it every now and then, but your average gamer might get a little impatient with it. The second problem for gamers who are kind of weaned on modern board games or modern games in general, there's player elimination. So you might end up having to get thrown out of the game and watch other people play for like the next hour, which is kind of a bummer, right? So modern designs like One Night Ultimate Werewolf and the Resistance, and really different things like Spyfall, did two things. One, they made the game really, really short. The Resistance is the longest of any of these games. It's about 45 minutes. Both One Night Werewolf and Spyfall take about 10 minutes to play. And none of these games really have any significant player elimination. And that's great. But a weird thing happened while this was happening. So the games got shorter, they got simpler. But then designers realized once they had this simple platform. So One Night Werewolf, what it did, in normal Werewolf, you have multiple nights. So like every night, everybody puts their head down, they go to sleep. You put your hand up if you're a werewolf and other werewolves can see you. As it goes along, players get killed off, and you do this like maybe a dozen times. One Night Werewolf took this into a process of a logic puzzle that occurs only once. So instead of being this complex kind of Baroque process of playing this sequence of rounds, it made a really interesting logic puzzle that you play for a single round. And that was kind of awesome. But what ended up happening is it became a logic puzzle, and that puzzle became more and more complex. So instead of becoming this multi-round thing where you kind of progressively eliminated players or progressively discovered who the werewolves were, the puzzle became more and more complex. And it's kind of a really interesting side effect of modern social deduction games. So at the end result, now we have something that really isn't kind of a social deduction game anymore, totally. I mean, it is, but at the same time, it's also kind of like a Euro game style puzzle. But there still are some really cool games that I think manage to kind of stay true to the Mafia and Werewolf bloodline and achieve gameplay innovations through more elegant means. The Resistance, the middle game I have here, was a game that the first version of this maybe is about 8 or 9 years old at this point. Sci-fi themed. The idea here is you take Werewolf, but instead of having these werewolves that are trying to like off the other players, you kind of have a situation of political intrigue where you have a traitor faction that is trying to distort the political policies of a futuristic nation. So the virtuous players are trying to preserve the democratic principles of their government, and they're being resisted, or they're providing the resistance to kind of this less desirable faction that's trying to take over and do bad things with the government. And that was a really interesting idea that the Resistance added. But the problem was the logic puzzle inside the Resistance was way too simple. And people solved it really quickly. And the game started to turn into basically people agreeing upon a set of social cues that they would use to play the game. So in other words, if you get this card and I get this card, well, then the third person around the table should do this and the fourth person should do that. And it really kind of sucked the fun out of what was a really kind of a decent idea. But there's some games I think that have come along. In fact, one that we'll talk about in a little bit that got around some of those issues. So I've talked a long time, and I apologize for that. Has anybody else here had any experience of the social deduction that they wanted to talk about? Games that they found interesting. So it looks like our cameraman Ghoster here has something you'd like to add. Actually, I don't know a ton about the social. I don't know a ton about the new Oregon Trail card game, but I do know that there is a new product out there. Sorry, I can't add too much. I saw it at Target. It has social deduction type themes. That's interesting. I was not aware of that. Anybody else have anything that they would like to add? No? Okay. All right. Then, if that is the case, I am not going to ask the second question, but I will give my comments to it. So I can't think of any genre of game that is better suited to VR than social deduction games. The reason I say that is because Tabletop Simulator and the other board game applications which gather you around a virtual table are all well and good for playing card games and board games. But I think to play social deduction properly, you need those cues. You need kind of like those little tells so that you can work out who's telling the truth, who's lying, who are the werewolves. And I think VR, particularly social VR, where immersion is a priority, and we can do cool things with our hands. We can kind of, maybe move around in a way that we express ourselves. And that can create really kind of an ideal environment for playing this style of game. So unless anybody has anything to add to the conversation, I'll just wrap this where I was going to. There is a new game coming to Altspace at some point soon. We're all really excited about it. Some people have had a chance to play it, called Secret Caesar. It's an awesome game that actually is in the Resistance family of games, and it fixes the two biggest problems of Resistance. So Resistance has two problems. The first one is that when you go on a mission in the Resistance, there's no randomness to it. So if people say the mission succeeds, their vote is taken. Secret Caesar and the original design that it's based on fixes this by adding some variability into the deck that adds some uncertainty. The second problem is there are no consequences or no game state changes in the Resistance to the failure or the success of missions. Once again, the Secret Caesar design adds implications that in fact have an effect and almost a rebalancing effect on the game based upon the outcome of the missions, or in this case, the political actions that are taken. So I'm not going to try to explain the game in full because we'll do that when it's here. But more than anything, I just wanted to draw attention to this great new game that we're all going to have access to pretty soon. It's designed by a group of gentlemen that you can see here, including, I believe, one of the designers of Cards Against Humanity, which is kind of random. That someone who could design a party game like Cards Against Humanity has made, I think, what is almost unanimously now agreed upon to be one of the finest social deduction designs yet. And I shouldn't emphasize enough the fact that this particular genre of gaming has really come a significant way in the last 5 years. And then the particular implementation we have here was coded up quite excellently by Stephen, who's right here in front of us, who, many of you may know Stephen as the ambassador of the SDK, the software development kit, here in Altspace. And in addition to kind of representing it, he's probably our biggest power user of it. And he created, a really amazing application that I think, number one, is a great game, but I think will be a great example for people like myself or Shiseki or anybody who's interested in the SDK to go look at and see how it works, because it has some interesting ideas and concepts in it that I think are very applicable to any number of projects within Altspace. So
it's worth noting.
Please, Stephen.
So I'm also the author of Holograms Against Humanity, but I would not recommend anyone pattern their coding style off of that code. It is just awful in hindsight. So this new one is much better. Hopefully it'll provide a better example for people. Once the game is live, I'll publish the repo for that.
And we have a very special theme just for Altspace for this game as well that I think is really cool. That may vary a bit from the source material, but I had a chance to see that for the first time this weekend, and it's really kind of awesome. The idea of the struggle of those in the Roman Empire that were trying to preserve democracy against those who wanted to install Caesar essentially as an emperor. Which is kind of like the prototypical form of fascism, it's really going to be awesome, and I think everybody's going to really enjoy it. I mean, Shiseki, you've played it a ton of times at this point, right? Anything you want to share about your experiences playing it, or?
It's genuinely, like you said, a social deduction game. You're trying to sniff people out. You're trying to feel whether they're lying. Are they double speaking what they're saying? Can you really trust, when they investigate somebody, can you trust what they report? It's great. It's really great. It's got a lot of depth.
Yeah. Very, very, very true indeed. And
of course, the big selling point on my part was that the source material of the source game is under a Creative Commons license. So.
Cool. But so outside of that, Stephen, I'm just kind of curious. Did you have any particular reason that you thought that the game might be well suited to Altspace? Like when you read the rules, or well, actually, let me go back even further than that. Had you played it in real life before you started to try to make it in an Altspace form?
I had actually. My friend was a Kickstarter supporter of the game, and I had never heard of it prior to that. But we played a game, and just immediately I saw the huge social impact that sort of thing has, and is perfectly suited for something like this. I was looking for a new Altspace project, so it sort of the stars aligned.
No, it was a great choice. Was there anything that kind of surprised you when people started to play it, like about the way they reacted to it, or maybe kind of some of the the interactions that occurred. Well, if you don't have an answer to that, I do. But anyway, yeah.
Well, I think the only sort of wrinkle that I wasn't quite sure about was so this game can take a decent amount of time. I'd say average probably about 30 minutes. Or do you think that's about right?
Yeah.
And I was worried that the abandonment rate would be pretty high, but experimentally that doesn't seem to really be a problem. So that's good.
I would totally agree with that. I can only think of maybe 2 games in the several dozen that I've played at this point where we had to abort purely due to a player wandering away. I think the thing that surprised me the most about playing this game was how quickly I was able to actually start to get social tells from people.
Oh, yeah.
Like I was starting to understand certain players a little bit. That totally shocked me, right? Because we don't have full emotive feedback that you would typically rely on from like an actual person standing in front of you here. But it pretty quickly started to develop, I think, from, I don't know if it's from how someone uses their hands or the way they're moving their head or what, but I can
speech
definitely.
Cadence is a lot of it too.
That's right. Yeah. I can't tell if that's because we're all just like adapting to Altspace and we're trying to find a way to like express ourselves here, and like that's now like basically a liability for us in social deduction games, or if it's just a consequence of a good immersive design of the platform. Test subject, it looks like your hand is up.
Yeah.
Do you have?
Yeah, I wanted to ask just one thing. I mean, Outspace is not for VR exclusive. I mean, it's not VR exclusive. Would the game be available for non-VR users? I mean, it's not a problem for me, but I'd like to bring my friends, for example, and make them install it on their PC.
I designed it from the beginning to support everything. Well, it actually doesn't support motion control, so it's entirely like a click-based interface. We actually do get a lot of people with hand tracking try and like touch the cards to activate them. I'll probably need to implement that at some point. But yeah, it fully supports everything from 2D, Gear VR, all the way up to Oculus and 5. So.
Oh, nice. Thank you.
And we've had many 2D players and tests that I've played in, and they seem to suffer no less of an experience from the game. I mean, I've played it on my Daydream before. That was kind of hard, but I think that was more just because the Daydream has some issues. But
well, you can't do annoying gestures when you're losing, so it's kind of.
Well, that is a curious point, though. I think only time will tell if players, like the other players, are at a disadvantage when somebody plays 2D. Right, because they don't have the hand gestures or the body motion or any of that. I don't know if the lack of those social signals will play any role in the successfulness of deduction, but I'm excited to find out.
Here's my
I guess you'll have to just orient to on voice instead of like anything else. Oh, interesting, yeah. Also, I really like how the theme of it corresponds with the futuristic setting on this picture.
Oh, so this, I think this picture was taken in so the game itself can be moved around, but it's probably just going to be in the conference room. It's a little more, the environment's a little more sterile, but I think it's appropriate.
Nice.
And
would fit nicely into a tavern setting, though.
I was hoping we could actually launch the activity today, and be able to announce it here, but unfortunately we weren't able to make that deadline. So just soon, TM, is when the activity comes out.
Okay, so I'm definitely forcing my friends to install Outspace now.
Always.
Yeah, it's a great reason to come into Altspace. I think it's going to really be an enjoyable activity for a lot of folks. But yeah, I think that's a good segue, actually. So, Stephen, I'm glad you were able to show up and talk a little bit about the game, even though we couldn't quite show it off tonight. But as a result of the fact that we can't do Secret Caesar, I was going to offer that since 2 weeks ago, I knew there was several people that wanted to try to get into the love letter game that we played that weren't able to. So I was just going to offer to run another instructional session of that. And I was hoping that it would load in right here. We actually are in the love letter room, but I think I screwed it up when I tried to load Secret Caesar into here while I was planning my event. So what I was just going to do was spool up a Secret Caesar activity, and we'll just use that instead of the event. So unless there were any other questions or comments about spooky games or social deduction, Mark.
Yeah. My question is all these games that support Alt VR, like Gear VR, would that be supported?
Which one?
Yeah.
Secret Caesar?
Yeah. Yeah.
Will it
All
support
the
Gear?
games. Will it support Gear VR? Because I've noticed that you had Rift on your board, and
Oh,
so
no,
you talk
yes.
about hand gestures and people that got
Yeah, so
like HTC
Secret
bars
Caesar,
and stuff like
I
that.
believe, Stephen, correct me if I'm wrong, I think pretty much any way you can use Altspace, you can play Secret Caesar. It should be pretty
Yeah, pretty
agnostic.
much. I mean,
Yeah.
strictly speaking, you could do the entire thing with just the mouse, right? You don't need a keyboard, you don't need a microphone. It won't be fun, right? Because having a microphone stream is very important to the game. But I mean, anything that supports Altspace is going to have all that anyway.
And as for
Cool.
Altspace's other games, almost all of them, I think, were designed before hands were even commonplace here, like Love Letter and so forth. So they all work great, regardless. The only one I know that for sure you can't gain access to on Gear is the Dungeons and Dragons room. I'm not exactly sure why that is exactly, because it works. It might be just like a polygon count issue or something like that.
Yeah, I think it's just that environment. It's too high poly and Gears overheat, so we disabled that.
Yeah.
Cool, thank you.
Sure. Any other questions or comments?
Well, apart from thanking you for the presentation and the amount of work that went into it, I guess not.
Sure. Thanks. I appreciate it. Yeah, thank you guys for coming out. And we're going to probably wrap the presentation at this point, Ghoster. But thank Ghoster for hosting the stream tonight. He does a great job doing that. And then thanks to our mod, Rockabella, for keeping everybody in line. And thanks for all the input. And thanks to Steven for coming out to talk a bit about his game. And thanks for making the game, by the way, because, I've really enjoyed playing it. I can't wait till it's here in the public. It'll be like a whole other experiment, actually, when it's available in the public. If what you were saying about, what I keep wondering is what you were saying about people focusing and not having people wandering off. It'll be interesting to see how that holds up when it's out in the wild.
Yeah.
But I'm hoping that with this group, actually, that maybe we can help spread the word and educate people, so that we can make it focused and fun for everybody. So anyway, goodbye. Oh, I'm sorry, Stephen. Go ahead. Yep.
No, I was just gonna say when holograms came out, there were plenty of people that didn't know how to play the game, but that game didn't even have an integrated tutorial. But the people that knew were in games with people that didn't, and it sort of worked its way outward. So it worked well.
Yeah, that'll be
And
really
this
interesting.
game does have an integrated tutorial, so that should make people's lives easier.
And we have to thank the voice, the man, the voice, Shiseki, for providing the first version of the voice.
Oh yes, actually, so there's a second voice integrated too. So I want at least one more voice, preferably if someone with a female voice wants to record something and send it. That'd be Rockabella.
Oh yeah, Rockabella, you should totally do it. That'd be awesome.
Yeah, I'll be in touch.
Yeah, we'll do it.
Awesome. Cool. All right, we'll say goodbye to YouTube now. So thank you for anybody watching this in the YouTube stream.
Bye, YouTube.
And there's 20 people watching? Okay, cool.
Wow. Wow.
That's actually kind of surprising.